Takeru is an ugly, overworked, middle-aged man who hates his boring life. One day, after returning home from his dead-end job, he collapses onto his couch to watch some TV, but all of a sudden, he finds himself teleported to a strange dimension with Discount Hero X sitting across from him. He says he's the one in charge of the solar system, so Takeru asks him if he's an alien, but he says he's actually more like a god, at least as far as Takeru is concerned. Long story short, it's his job to make sure the life on various different planets doesn't go extinct, and he does that by throwing people into new worlds to see what happens. Takeru happens to be the next on the list of people to be sent out, and of course he has the right to refuse, but since he's technically dead right now, his soul will vanish if he doesn't agree to be sent to another world. Takeru doesn't think that's fair at all, and he's right, it's not fair, but there's nothing he can do about it. Kami tells him he doesn't have to worry about it too much since he will be given special powers so he can survive in the new world, but he hasn't really thought about what abilities he should give Takeru, so he takes out a notepad and starts writing down some ideas. Obviously, he would need to be able to use magic, so Kami writes down maxed out mana and asks Takeru if there's anything else he'd want to get. Since Kami is accepting requests, Takeru asks him if he can get a big opaque goth girlfriend in the new world. But with how ugly and boring Takeru is, Kami says it won't be easy. Still, he promises to work something out for him once he arrives, and as an added bonus, is granting Takeru an amazing search ability, global language understanding, and several debuff resistances. He's honestly not sure if he's allowed to give people so many op stats in one go, but there's no time to change it now since Takeru's body has already begun to disappear, so he wishes him good luck with his new life. In the next moment, Takeru wakes up lying next to a tree, and he has a good grasp of what happened, but he wonders what he should do now. He decides to just start walking in a random direction in hopes of running into some people, and fortunately, he manages to spot a village close by. Although going there right now wouldn't do him much good since he is 100% broke right now. Just then, he remembers that Kami said he'd be getting a search skill to help him gather material, and that sounds like a good way to earn money, so he holds out his stick and shouts for the search magic to activate, but nothing happens. He then starts freaking out because if he can't figure out how to use his ability, then he's going to starve sooner or later. He starts writing out possible trigger words in the ground, and he eventually comes up with the idea to just say the word search. And that seems to do the trick. Purple icons pop up next to all the harvestable items in the area, and if he says the word scan next to one, it shows a detailed description of what it is. This particular flower happens to be B rank, and he's not sure what that means, but it must be good, so he decides to gather as many plants as he can from this area. After a few minutes of gathering, Takeru has gotten a few pieces of everything this area of the forest has to offer. But most of the plants turn out to be E rank, so he's not sure if doing this was worth the effort. Just then, he notices a pretty rock nearby, and he wonders if it's valuable enough to sell, but when he picks it up, his scan tells him it's just a big piece of anteater poop, which is gross, but the poop is C rank for some reason, so he can't complain. He has gathered up enough resources for the day, so he decides that it's time to head over to the village and see how much money he can get from selling these. By nightfall, Takeru eventually arrives at the village gates where he meets one of the guards, and I can't tell if Takeru is really tall or if the guard is just really short. The guard's name is Marlowe, and he is surprised to hear that Takeru is a gatherer because it's rare to see people like him around here. Marlowe assumes he must be here to sell some materials, so he opens the gate and tells Takeru to head to the village's general store. Takeru eventually arrives at the general store, and there he meets the store owner behind the front desk. He asks the man if he is willing to buy some stuff from him, and as he says this, he pulls the poop rock out of his bag. The owner is amazed when he sees the rock because it's an amazing find, so he offers to pay 5 gold coins for it. Takeru is glad to hear that he can sell the rock, but he's not sure what 5 gold coins are really worth here, so he asks the owner for a little explanation. The owner tells him that if he wanted to stay at an inn, he'd have to pay around 500 raves, and 5 gold coins are worth 5,000 raves total, so this poop rock is actually pretty valuable. The owner asks Takeru if he has any more goods to offer, so he empties his bag, and the owner can't believe all the exotic plants he managed to gather. He asks why Takeru bothered coming to a remote village like this if he had this many valuable items, so he explains that he just picked these up during his journey here. The old man understands, and now that he has an idea of Takeru's skills, he says he has a favorite ask. Takeru didn't come here expecting to receive a side quest, but he says he's willing to help depending on the difficulty of the request. So the owner explains that he wants Takeru to get some mithril ore from the eastern mountains. That sounds like a lot of work, but the owner says he's willing to pay 360 gold coins for it, so Takeru accepts the mission. However, the owner then turns serious and mentions that there are monsters out in those mountains, and hearing that makes Takeru really nervous, so he is going to need to be careful. That night, Takeru rents out a room at the village inn, and he is glad he finally gets a chance to relax. The only thing that'd make this better is if he could get a bath, but he's not sure where to find one. Just then, one of the housekeepers knocks on the door and comes in with a bowl of hot water. Takeru asks her what this is for, so she explains that part of their service is to offer guests bowls of hot water so they can clean themselves, and Takeru's stench practically made her eyes water while he was checking in, so she brought some without him needing to ask for it. Takeru appreciates the gesture, but he says he'd prefer to have a proper bath instead. However, the girl looks at him in confusion because only nobles and rich people can afford to have baths, and Takeru has "Brokey" written all over his face. He falls to his knees at the realization that he won't be able to take baths normally in this world, and the girl can see that he's really upset about not getting a bath, so she tells him that there are some wizards who are able to use spells to clean others, so maybe he could try that instead. After hearing her mention wizards, Takeru remembers that Kami gave him the ability to use magic, so he should be able to use a cleaning spell. He's really grateful for the girl's insight, so he gives her a huge tip as thanks and sends her on her way. Once she's gone, he attempts to use cleaning magic by yelling out the word "clean," and it works on the first try. However, feeling the magic rub all over his body causes him to make some weird noises, so the girl probably thinks he's a weirdo now. On the bright side, the clean spell seems to be really effective, so Takeru isn't going to have to worry about smelling funky all the time, but he still wishes he could enjoy a proper bath. The next day, Takeru heads out to gather a few more items to sell when he notices a new symbol from his search skill. Each symbol represents a particular kind of loot, so he wonders what it might be. But to his utter horror, when he takes a look, he finds a decomposing skeleton on the ground. His scan tells him that this poor guy is named Belria, and he must have died fighting out here a while ago. He goes closer to inspect the corpse, and that's when he finds a locket with a note on it. The note was from Belria's little sister, and she was basically thanking him for working so hard to earn money to treat their father's illness, but more than anything, she just wanted her brother to make it home safely, so she asked him not to do anything too dangerous, but he clearly didn't listen to her advice. Takeru spends the next hour holding a burial for Belria, and once that's done, he draws a circle and casts a barrier so he can set up camp. The next morning, Takeru heads further into the forest until he arrives at the Forest of White Trees. This place is supposedly full of monsters and creepy as hell, so Takeru would have loved to avoid this place altogether, but it's the only way for him to get to the Eastern Mountain. He casts a light spell so he can see well enough to scan the area, but he doesn't spot anything of high value. Even weirder is the fact that he doesn't see any monsters around here, even though this place is supposed to be crawling with them. He doesn't question it too much and decides to take advantage of the strange absence of monsters to breeze his way through the forest. However, as he was running, he ended up falling straight off the edge of a cliff. There's no way he'd survive a drop like this, so he desperately starts calling out spell words in an attempt to save himself, and fortunately, when he says the word "fly," a floating spell activates, allowing him to land safely. He's now stuck at the bottom of a cavern, but he notices a ton of ores in the nearby walls, so he decides to make the most of it and starts mining them out. He finds a lot of valuable ores like silver, but there's still no sign of any mithril, so he decides to head deeper into the caves. After walking for a bit, his search skill alerts him to an ore deep in some rocks, but before Takeru could head over, he feels the entire cave system begin to shake, so he's going to need to be careful. He uses a controlled fire blast to break through the rock, and as luck would have it, he manages to find some mithril ore, but it's not much. The cave system suddenly begins shaking again, so Takeru is starting to worry that the roof might collapse. The smart thing to do right now would be to head home for the day and come back when you know it's safe, but just like a fanatic cage diver, he decides to keep going deeper anyway. He eventually comes across an opening which leads him to a beautiful aquifer, and he is really excited because the water looks so dazzling. He uses his ability to scan it, and to his surprise, he discovered that this is S-rank ancient dragon magical water. This is the most valuable thing he has ever found, but that ancient dragon part does concern him a little since he wouldn't want to have to deal with one of those. Just then, as Takeru dips his hands in the water, something huge emerges from the water, and a moment later, Takeru is face to face with the ancient dragon. The dragon yells at him for daring to intrude upon its lair, and it is letting off a deadly pressure to intimidate Takeru, but he doesn't actually notice anything wrong. Takeru realizes this is his fault for intruding on the dragon's home, so he sincerely apologizes for his mistake, but this catches the dragon off guard since it has never seen someone remain so calm in its presence before. It takes a liking to Takeru and asks him if he's really a human because he has an unnaturally high amount of mana. It says Takeru's mana pool might even be greater than its own, but Takeru has no idea what it's talking about. The dragon's name is Voldis, and he has a favorite ask now that he knows Takeru has such an expansive mana pool. Basically, it wants Takeru to hatch its egg since it doesn't have enough mana to do it, and as a reward, it will give him a large cluster of mithril ore. Takeru thinks that sounds easy enough to do, so he takes the egg and starts channeling mana into it, but halfway through, the egg suddenly starts draining all his mana until he eventually loses consciousness. By the time he wakes up, he finds a little baby dragon sitting in front of him, so he realizes the hatching was a success. Voldius is glad to see his child has finally been born, but he then proceeds to ask Takeru to take it with him on his journey. Takeru asks if he's sure about this since he thought Voldius would want to spend time with his kid, but Voldius says Takeru is far stronger than him, so his child would be better off with him. And now that Voldius has some milk to buy at the bottom of his lake, so he submerges himself and leaves Takeru to take care of Bee. Takeru and Bee eventually make it out of the cave, but it's almost dark out and it'll be difficult for them to travel through the forest once it's nighttime. He decides that the best course of action is to hunker down for the night and continue traveling tomorrow, so he tells Bee to get ready to set up camp. First, he reaches into his storage bag and fetches some of the magic water that he got from the cave for Bee. The magic water is apparently essential for the growth of a young dragon, so it's a good thing he got so much of it. After Bee is done with her first cup, she asks Takeru for some more, but when he brings another cup of water, instead of taking it, she pushes it towards Takeru, encouraging him to drink it instead. Takeru isn't particularly thrilled by the idea of drinking water a dragon has been skinny dipping in for centuries, but he doesn't want to say no to Bee, so he downs the glass, and it actually doesn't taste that bad. It's now time for Takeru to set up camp, so he sets down a few magic stones to create a protective barrier. Technically, in this world, magic stones are supposed to be an insanely valuable commodity, but he's able to casually make them by just thinking about a spell really hard and pouring magic into his hand. This one, for instance, is a heating magic stone, and Takeru plans to use it to prepare tonight's dinner, so he sets it up in the fireplace and starts cooking. He's making some grilled steak and meat stew to go alongside it. This has always been his favorite dish, and it looks like Bee wants to have a taste as well because she's practically drooling all over herself at this point. Takeru isn't sure if it's alright for a baby dragon to eat real food when it was born like 2 hours ago, but he gives her a bowl anyway, and Bee promptly burns her lips because she had no idea the soup was so hot. Takeru blows on it a little to help cool it down and hands it back to Bee so she can give it a proper taste, and she absolutely loves the stew. Takeru is glad to see that Bee liked his cooking so much, but he wonders how she feels about having to leave Voldius behind. Bee stares at Takeru with a confused expression on her face because why would she miss Voldius when she's got Takeru right here? While Bee is hugging him, he uses his appraisal skill on her, and he is surprised to see that Bee is already B rank even though she's still so little and cute. She also has a bunch of strong-sounding gifts like limitless evolution, so she's bound to become stronger than him eventually, but he wants to make it clear that she's absolutely forbidden from doing anything that'd be too reckless, which is good advice in principle, but Bee wasn't listening at all. The next morning, Takeru climbs back up the cliff, and when he gets to the top, he's surprised to see that the forest seems totally normal now. He wonders what could have caused such a drastic change overnight, but it's not his job to figure things like this out, so he decides to just let it go. Since he's here anyway, he figures he might as well do some gathering, so he uses his search ability to scan for any C-rank ingredients nearby, but just as he is about to start picking them up, Bee comes flying over to him in a panic because there's something scary in the forest. Takeru switches the target of his scan to any hostile monsters in the area, and sure enough, he locates half a dozen hostiles closing in on them. He may not enjoy fighting, but he's more than capable of dealing with a few monsters on his own. All of a sudden, a rock griffin appears behind him, but compared to Voldius, this barely seems like an inconvenience, and if anything, he can't wait to taste the bird's juicy meat once he kills it. He casts his shield to protect himself and then conjures up 3 ice needles before shooting them at the monster and taking it down in one fell swoop. He then turns to face the horde of wolves that's closing in on him, and to deal with them, he casts some enhancement magic on himself to boost his movement speed and jumps into the air to evade the wolves' initial attack. He then casts hardening on his hands and feet and caves one skull in on his way down with an axe kick. Afterwards, he takes the remaining wolves out one after another, and by the time he's done, he's got a lot of meat to collect for his next meal. He's happy with the haul he got from that battle, but when he looks up, he realizes there are still a ton of monsters out there, and if he tries fighting them all, he's going to be stuck in this forest for weeks. He wishes there was a way he could just avoid dealing with them altogether. And as he says this, Bee grabs onto the back of his jacket and starts trying to pull him into the air. Takeru wasn't expecting this to work since Bee is so much smaller than him. But as it turns out, she's actually pretty strong, so she manages to lift him into the air. However, at this rate, it'll take them 4 to 5 business days to get out of this forest, so Takeru decides to help out by casting weight reduction magic on himself. The second he does that, he and Bee shoot straight into the air, but Bee isn't exactly a trustworthy pilot, So midway through the flight, she accidentally lets go of Tegru, and he is sent hurtling straight for the ground. Somehow, he managed to survive that devastating fall, and on the bright side, he managed to make it out of the white forest in a matter of minutes, so the mild hip fracture was definitely worth it. They are pretty close to the village, but Tegru doesn't want to risk flying on B, so he decides to just walk instead. Along the way, B starts pointing towards the stick in Tegru's hand, asking what it is. He tells her that it's apparently a branch of the Yggdrasil tree, and it was just sitting in the bag that God gave him, so he decides to just take it out and point it at stuff to see what happens. B seems to understand something about the stick, so she breathes out a cloud of magic onto it, awakening the stick's true form. Tegru has no idea how or why that worked, but before he can figure it out, he suddenly hears a loud growling noise coming from the forest, so he immediately gets himself ready for a fight. Just then, B flies off into the forest by herself, so Tegru is forced to chase after her until they eventually find an elf girl propped up against a tree. Tegru rushes over to aid her since he's worried that she might have been injured by a monster, but the girl tells him she's not hurt, she's just really hungry. She hasn't had anything to eat or drink for 3 days now, and she's on the verge of starving to death, so she begs Tegru to spare her some rations. He can't just leave her like this, so he reaches into his bag and gives her some water, as well as the lunch he packed for himself earlier. The girl's eyes light up the second she sees the food, and she wastes no time scarfing it all down in a matter of seconds, but now that she's no longer starving, Tegru has a few questions for her. For one, he wonders how the hell she has been starving out here for 3 days when the nearest town is barely a day's walk away. The girl admits that she was in a hurry and got lost on her way out here. But even so, it's common sense to carry at least a few days' worth of rations with you at all times, yet she literally brought nothing. The girl is a little embarrassed and tries thinking of a good excuse, but she gets way too close to Tegru in the process, and once he catches a whiff of her, he realizes she stinks. The girl tries to defend herself by telling him it's not her fault since she had to camp out here for days on end with no supplies, but that doesn't change the fact that she smells like manure right now. The girl gets up and tells Tegru that while she is thankful for him saving her, she thinks it was incredibly rude for him to say that she stinks, even if it was true. She then runs off to continue her journey, but she didn't ask for any directions and she still has no supplies, so he doesn't think she's going to make it very far. But that's not his problem to deal with, so he continues heading back to the city with B. They eventually make it out of the forest, and along the road, B notices a carriage approaching, so he stops to talk to the driver. The man notices his staff and asks Tegru if he is a sorcerer, but while he could definitely be one if he wanted to, Tegru wants to stick to peaceful jobs, so he tells the man he's just a gatherer who happens to have a staff. The man then asks him what he's doing all the way out here, so Tegru explains that he is heading towards Hormi village. The man is surprised to hear that he's heading there on foot since it's quite a long journey, but it's not like he had much of a choice. The driver offers to give him a ride back to the village if he would like, and Tegru appreciates the gesture, but he's pretty big, so he is worried that he might take up too much space in the carriage. But both the man and his family already aboard tell him there's nothing to worry about, so he goes around back and climbs in. Something Tegru notices recently is that ever since he came to this world, children seem to just naturally like him. He's not sure why, but it makes things easier for him since if the kids like him, then most adults will be nice to him as well. He thanks them once again for giving him a ride, but they say it's not a big deal since everyone in Tormi helps each other out whenever they are in trouble. Tegru appreciates their generosity, but he thinks they are being a little too trusting since he could have been a bandit for all they knew. However, they tell him they knew he was not a bandit because if he were a bad person, then this bell would have rung and they never would have offered him a ride. Tegru is amazed that bells can be enchanted with magic stones to detect whether someone is bad or not, and he wonders if he can make something like that for himself later. Just then, Yunin notices a strange sound coming from Tegru's jacket, so she asks him what it is, and he is forced to explain that he actually brought a rare monster with him. He was expecting the family to freak out a little at the mention of a monster, but they tell him that it's actually perfectly normal for adventurers to keep monsters as pets from time to time, so it doesn't bother them. In that case, there's no reason for Tegru to hide B any longer, so he tells her she can come out, but she had better not bite anyone. Once the kids see B, they are both overwhelmed by how cute she is, but Eliza and Palom are both more impressed by the fact that Tegru managed to tame a dragon cub. They ask him if he happens to be a dragon knight, but he says he just happened to find and hatch a dragon while he was out on a mission. Once it's time to take a break for the night, Tegru sets up his barrier and he assures the family that as long as the barrier remains up, no monsters will come anywhere near them. And even if something does try to attack them, B will be here to alert them before it gets too close. They are all glad to know that they are safe for the night, but they still need to do something about their dinner, so Eliza gets ready to start cooking. But before she does, Tegru asks her if she'd be willing to let him handle the meal prep for today. He reaches into his bag and pulls out all his pans, which amazes the kids since there's no way all that stuff should be able to fit in such a small sack. Takeru explains that his bag operates like an item box, so there's a lot more space on the inside than it seems, and it's really handy for gathering things. Once Takeru is done cooking, everyone digs in and they are all delighted by how delicious his food is, especially Paulum since he was sick of having to eat dried meat all the time. As the night drags on, they all begin to sing songs and dance to pass the time, and the kids even invite Takeru to join in. He never got to experience anything like this when he was back on Earth, since he'd always just spend the night alone in front of his TV, but eating with others is a lot more fun than he thought it would be. The next morning, Takeru wakes up and begins working on cleaning his scissors to keep himself busy until it's time to get back on the road. Poland tells him they can head out after they've had breakfast, but Takeru actually has a small favor he'd like to ask. He has never tried driving a carriage before, so he asks Poland to let him try, and he sees no issue with it. So he lets Takeru take the reins, and before long they arrive at the village. Takeru gets off the carriage and Poland thanks him for sharing his food, but Takeru says he should be the one thanking them since he didn't have to walk all the way back on his own. Poland and the others drive off afterwards, and as the short guard watches them leave, he says it must finally be spring. Takeru doesn't know what that's supposed to mean, so he asks the guard for an explanation, and he is informed that Poland does weaving for a living. He frequently travels to warmer regions for work, and the journey is always difficult for him and his family. Unable to hunt, they're left to survive on meager rations. That explains why he was so happy to taste Takeru's food, and learning how bad Poland has it makes Takeru realize how lucky he is to have an ability that allows him to gather materials. A little while later, Takeru heads back to Jerome's store to deliver the materials that he was asked to gather, and as a little test, Takeru slips one magic mithril ore he got from the dragon's den in with the regular mithril to see if Jerome is the kind of person to scam him. Jerome spends a long time examining the rocks, and he eventually comes to the conclusion that this one in particular must be a piece of magic mithril ore. He tells Takeru that a few of these contain enough magic to replace most of the magic stones in the kingdom, and Takeru feigns surprise even though he already knew that. Jerome tells him it's amazing that he was able to find something this valuable, but Takeru tries to downplay the achievement and says he just happened to come across it on his trip. Even if Takeru claims to have found it lying at his feet, Jerome says it still takes considerable skill to be able to find things like this, so he tells Takeru that he would be better off heading to the city of Belkame. It's much larger than this village, and as much as Jerome doesn't like the idea of letting talent like Takeru leave, he will be able to find a larger variety of items to buy and sell compared to what he would get here. He just asks that when Takeru eventually makes a name for himself, he send a few extra customers Jerome's way. Takeru doesn't actually intend on becoming famous or anything, but the idea of heading to the big city does intrigue him, so he decides to read about it once he gets back to the inn. There, he finds out that Belkame has an adventurers guild that brokers requests all across the country. The adventurers themselves are divided into combat, support, and various other roles, and since Takeru is in another world, he wants to try out adventuring and traveling the world for a while. He decides that he is going to go join the guild in Belkame, but before that, there are still a few things he needs to do in Tormy. He heads into town and first finds someone to process all the monsters he caught. And while he's waiting for that to be done, he spends the night partying with the villagers and enjoying a feast. The next morning, Takeru heads back to the butcher, and now that all of the monster parts have been processed, he has enough food and seasoning stock to last for the duration of his journey. The woman tells him it's going to be lonely around here without Takeru around, and a lot of the other villagers have been saying they want him to stay a little longer as well. Takeru says he will miss this place as well, but there are a lot of exciting places out there for him to visit and new people for him to meet, so he can't settle down here. The woman understands, so she says she won't push the matter any further, but before Takeru leaves, she wants to give him something extra. She hands him a bag and says she packed him a travel lunch. Actually, she packed him a ton of travel lunches, so it looks like Takeru isn't going to have to worry about food for a while. After that, he heads back to his room, and the only thing left to do is figure out what to use the magic mithril ore for. Jerome told him he couldn't afford to buy it, so Takeru has no idea what he's supposed to do with it now. It's too valuable for him to just toss out, but since it supposedly has a ton of magical energy inside it, Takeru wonders if he can use it to create something useful for the villagers since they've been so nice to him. Just then he notices his lamp on the table, and it gives him an idea, so he takes the magic stone and tries combining it with the lantern. It doesn't take long for him to figure out how to do it, and after a large flash, a magic item was created. The next morning, as Takeru was about to depart, the entire village came out to say goodbye to him. Takeru thanks them for everything they've done for him, and as his way of showing his appreciation, he made this for them. He tells everyone that it's a magic item that will create a barrier around the village to keep out any people with malicious intent, and while they are all grateful for his kindness, They wonder if it's really okay for them to take something so valuable. Takaru tells them it's fine since it's the least he can do to repay them. Plus, he wanted to make sure the village would still be in one piece in case he comes back to visit. Jerome is a little curious about what's powering the device, so he takes a look inside and sure enough, he finds the magic stone, which is worth a small fortune. He's about to say that they really can't accept a gift that's so expensive, but Takaru already ran out of the gate while he was talking, so there's no way he can return it now. While Takaru is walking on his way to Belkame, he takes a moment to enjoy the peaceful scenery. However, that peace doesn't last long because he soon encounters a random giant crab in the middle of the road. After the initial shock wears off, Takaru takes a look at the crab's stat and everything is pretty unremarkable. But as soon as Takaru sees that the crab is edible, he decides that he and B will be having seafood for dinner today. Takaru casts enhancement magic on himself in preparation for the fight. Before he could actually do anything, B suddenly flies ahead and hits the crab with a sonic scream that knocks it out cold. Takaru is impressed since he had no idea that B could do something like that, but the battle isn't over yet because two more crabs suddenly show up. Takaru thinks he's safe in the middle of the road since crabs can only move sideways, but he was horribly wrong since these crabs are able to move forward really fast. They both have him surrounded, so Takaru is about to be smushed, but before the crabs close in, B pulls Takaru into the air, causing them to smash into one another instead. Takaru thanks B for her quick thinking, but the fight still isn't over yet because the first crab just regained consciousness, and it mindlessly charges at Takaru, so he summons his staff and smacks the crab straight into the air, finally killing it. Now that all the crabs have been defeated, it's time for Takaru to start preparing them. So first, he uses hardening on his arm to turn it into a makeshift knife, and then he gets to work cutting off all the claws and legs. A few minutes later, he has prepared all the limbs for boiling, so he pulls out a giant pot and puts them all in. Don't ask where he got the giant pot though. He adds water and a bunch of salt, and after boiling for a few hours, the crab meat is finally ready, so he and B dig in. They both absolutely love the flavor of the crab meat, so from now on, Takaru plans to take down and eat as many monsters as possible so he can try all sorts of delicious meals. A few days later, Takaru and B arrive at the gates of the city of Belkame, and he is amazed by how magnificent the fortress walls are. He notices that there's a long line at the gate where inspections are being done, so he walks over to join the queue, but before it gets to his turn, he decides to disguise his magic bag since it would be bad if the guards found out he has infinite storage. Once it's Takaru's turn, he gets called into a separate room to meet with the guards, and while one goes through his belongings, the other asks him what business he has in Belkame. Takaru explains that he came here because he's interested in signing up at the Adventurers Guild, and the male guard can understand why since Belkame has the largest guild on the continent. He doesn't think Takaru is suspicious, but he still needs to do his job, so he tells him he's going to check him with avarice. Takaru has never heard of this avarice before, so he asks the guard what it does, and he explains that it basically lets them check if a person is suspicious or not. Takaru doesn't mind since it's either this or a full cavity search, so the guard uses the device to scan him, and after a few seconds, he says there's nothing out of the ordinary. Takaru is kind of curious about what the guard saw, so he uses his ability to scan the magic device, and he sees the stat window which showed the guard. It basically just says Takaru can use magic, and he's relieved that the laundry list of abilities that the god gave him don't show up on normal scans. The guards tell him he's good to go, but he does have one more question before Takaru leaves. It's not a big deal, but he's wondering why Takaru has the blessing of the dragons on his stat screen. Takaru explains that it's probably because of his pet, so he tells B to come out, and both guards are in awe of how cute she is. There are no rules against having pet dragons here, so Takaru is allowed to take B inside, but the guard tells him he's going to have to put some sort of tag on B as proof of ownership in case anything happens in the city. Takaru isn't sure what to use since he didn't bring a collar with him, but then he remembers that Poland's kids gave him a lucky charm a few days ago, so he takes it out of his bag and slides it onto B's tail. The guard says that's good enough, so now all that's left is to file a report telling the mayor that a dragon has entered the city, but Takaru doesn't have to worry about that. They return his bag and tell him that if he wants to get to the Adventurers Guild, then he can get there by going straight along the main road. As Takaru takes his first steps into the city, it is even more amazing than he thought it would be. Just then, B points to a big building at the end of the street, and that must be the Adventurers Guild, so he heads inside and takes a look around. A few moments later, a woman named Europa approaches Takaru, and she welcomes him to the Adventurers Guild. They are always happy to get new registrations, so she leads him over to the reception desk where Takaru is introduced to the receptionist Ariana. She asks him to fill out his name and current job on the form, and that sounds simple enough. But now that Takaru thinks about it, he doesn't know why he is able to understand this world's language at all. After filling out the form, Ariana asks Takaru if he has any combat experience, and Takaru informs her that he has taken out a griffin, a bunch of wolves, and a couple of crabs as well. That all sounds very impressive, but Ariana kind of thinks Takaru is making it up, so she asks if he has any proof of his kills. He says he does have proof, but it's pretty big, so he asks her if it's really alright for him to bring it out right here. Ariana doesn't think it will be that bad, so she tells Takaru to go ahead, but to her shock, he pulls out a giant crab and drops it right on her desk. The weight of the crab crushes Ariana's desk instantly, and Takaru realizes he may have messed up, but in his defense, he did warn her that it would be big. All the guild patrons gather around to see what all the commotion is about, and the guild master asks what's going on. Takaru says he just wanted to show Ariana his crab, and the guild master can see that, but he gets suspicious of the fact that Takaru has an item box, so he asks him where he got it. Takaru says he got it as a gift, and after using his ability, the guild master confirms that Takaru is telling the truth. The guild master has a scan ability similar to Takaru's, but instead of a stat screen, he just sees an aura around a person that tells him whether they have good or bad intentions, and Takaru seems fine, so there's no need to punish him for a simple mistake. He says they can appraise the crab and issue payment by the end of the day, but Takaru says he actually plans to eat the crab later, which shocks everyone in the guild. The crowd is starting to get even bigger, so Ariana says she will finish Takaru's registration in the room next door. Once she's at a new desk, she tells him that the crab definitely proved that he is a capable fighter, so she finishes up his registration and slides a guild armband over to him. She knows he deserves a higher rank, but according to the guild rules, all new members have to start at F rank. However, with his skills, he should be able to rank up in no time. This was the end of episode 3. Subscribe to not miss the next part. Sifil is a gamer who just lost his max level character during a huge war event he organized, but all his friends had a lot of fun, so he has no regrets. His war was apparently so popular that he ended up receiving an offer from the dev team of the game, and since he's excited to see what they have in store for him, he clicks accept without a second thought. However, he probably should have read the terms and conditions, because a moment later he finds himself in a strange room with tons of people staring at him. And to make matters worse, his family jewels were missing too. He realizes he has somehow been placed in the body of his character, Lufez, and the people seem absolutely terrified of him, so he attempts to politely ask them what's going on. However, as soon as Lufez's mouth opens, an immense pressure fills the room, and everyone inside is pushed face down to the floor. Outwardly, Lufez is condescendingly asking the group if they normally taste the floor whenever they meet someone new, but inside, Sifil is just freaking out because he has no idea why all this is happening. Just then, he remembers that Lufez has an intimidation skill that's probably causing all of this, so he tries to calm down and turn it off, but it takes a few minutes for him to figure it out, so the people have been stuck to the ground for a while. Once things finally go back to normal, Lufez walks up to one of the elves in the room and asks him for an explanation, to which he promptly faints out of fear, but she eventually gets the answers she's looking for. Long story short, 200 years have passed since she was sealed away, and the demon lord is still alive, so in order to defeat him, the kingdom attempted to summon another hero, which is how Lufez ended up here. This means Sifil really was sucked into the game, and he's honestly really excited about it, but he realizes it must be terrifying to be in his presence while he possesses Lufez's body, so he should probably leave soon before he gives someone a heart attack. Just then, Lufez speaks up, and she tells everyone that she understands their concern regarding her presence since she kind of nearly took over the world at one point, but she assures them that her conquering days are over, so they don't have to worry. Although she also has no interest in becoming their new hero, so she says they can just forget about her and summon another one or something because she's not sticking around. The king asks her where she plans to go, so Lufez tells him that she's just going to spend some time appreciating this world for what it is, but she'd be willing to come back if the need arises. Lufez then takes off, and Sifil somehow completely understands how Lufez's wings function, so he is able to use them without much issue. Lufez was Sifil's main when X-Gate originally launched, and thanks to the game's novel system, actions taken by gamers were officially added in as lore, so with all the time and money Sifil spent getting Lufez to the top of the leaderboards, she is generally recognized as one of the most terrifying characters in this world. He could have stayed at the top of the leaderboards forever if he wanted, but that would have been way too boring, so instead he made a deal with all the game's top players at the time and had everyone split into the light and dark factions so they could have an all-out war. The war in question resulted in Lufez being sealed away in a subspace after her defeat, and while it was a lot of fun for Sifil, for this world it was reality, so Lufez is almost universally feared here for what she did. Mind you, the entire time Sifil and his friends were enacting their little war, they completely ignored the game's main objective of slaying the demon lord, so Orm is still alive and has been that way since Lufez was sealed, but that's not anywhere near the top of her priority list, so she'll deal with it later. Right now, she just wants to experience the game world that has now become a reality. Lufas's first stop is her old Malfel base of operations, and it is truly an impressive sight. Granted, it's a little rough around the edges after 200 years of collecting dust, but it's still amazing to see it in person. Lufas takes a seat on the throne, and Safel starts thinking about all the good times he's had with his friends in this place. He recalls how they have fun chatting about a bunch of nonsense all the time, but that he realizes that those discussions were all in a group chat, so why does he remember it as though he were there in person? Just then, Lufas notices someone approaching, which puts her on edge since the base should be empty, but when she takes a look, it turns out to be a blue-haired girl named Dinah. She is really excited to see Lufas since she has been waiting 2 centuries for her return, but Lufas has no idea who this chick is. Dinah is incredibly hurt to realize that Lufas forgot about her even though she was her most loyal advisor, but Lufas doesn't remember ever having a use for an advisor in the first place. However, now that he thinks about it, Safel recalls that when he was building this base, he thought it would be cool to have an NPC in the background to make the place feel more alive, so he placed Dinah and just kind of left her there. She must have gained consciousness when this world became reality, and Safel feels kind of bad since she was stuck here by herself for 200 years, so Lufas plays along and says there's no way she forget about Dinah. She thanks Dinah for protecting the base while she was gone, and Dinah is incredibly grateful to hear such kind words from Lufas. But putting that aside, with all the time that has passed, Lufas is out of the loop on the current state of the world, so she asks Dinah for a quick history lesson to catch up with modern affairs. Dinah says she'd be more than happy to explain everything she knows, so she tells Lufas that after she was defeated, the 7 heroes went on to found their own separate nations. 4 of them have already died due to natural causes in the past 200 years, but the 3 with longer lifespans are still around. Lufas can't help but wonder whether the heroes in this world are really still his friends or if they became NPCs, so he plans to pay them a visit sooner or later. Next, Dinah explains that the Demon King, Orm, is still alive, and that's mainly because the 7 heroes failed to defeat him after they sealed Lufas away. In other news, Dinah says that Lufas's 12 heavenly stars are still around as well, though most have gone their separate ways. The 12 stars are a group of rare and powerful monster NPCs that Safel collected because he thought it would be cool to have a small army of elite generals serve under him. Lufas asks Dinah if there are any updates on the 12 stars, and she says she knows the location of 6 of them, but 2 of those 6 seem to have joined the demon army in an attempt to get back at the heroes who sealed Lufas away. Lufas is a little disappointed to hear that some of her minions joined the demon army over her defeat since the beef was never that deep, so she's going to have to chew them out once she finds those 2. With that aside, she's glad that she at least has something to do now. Her initial plan was to just go around exploring the world for fun and find out whether the 3 remaining heroes are players like her or not. But first she needs to go round up the 12 heavenly stars because she'd be responsible if any of them went around causing trouble for no reason. She asks Dinah to give her the location of the first heavenly star, so she pulls up a map and points to a place called Svel. This is where one of the heroes has been living for the past few years, and the heavenly star, Eris, has been trying to invade it for months now. Now that she knows where to find Eris, she immediately starts heading out to find him, but Dinah yells for her to come back because she can't just leave without making preparations. First of all, Lufas has no money on her, and Dinah would have been willing to give her some. Inflation's a pain, and she's been waiting so long that all the money she had is practically worthless now. Lufas says she can just earn some more money along the way, but Dinah tells her no one is going to want to do business with the legendary conqueror. Lufas argues that there's no way anyone would recognize her face after 200 years, but she is reminded that races like elves exist, and a bunch of them are bound to know who she is, especially since the kingdom has probably issued a public warning of her arrival. However, if Lufas wants to earn money, then Dinah knows of a job she can do that doesn't require a background check: adventuring. To get started, Dinah leaves Lufas to the trade city of Ydalir, but she would draw too much attention with her dark wings exposed, so Lufas sticks them in her oversized cloak as a disguise. She hates how uncomfortable it is to walk around like this, but they don't really have much of a choice in this situation, so she'll just have to deal with it for now. Once they arrive at the Adventurers Guild, Lufas mentions that it feels nostalgic to be back in the den of misfits and degenerates since, according to her lore, she was an adventurer before she founded her dark nation. However, she soon realizes how weird it is that she feels a sense of nostalgia from this when it is technically her first time setting foot in the guild. Dinah notices that Lufas seems lost in thought, so she asks her if something is wrong, but she just brushes it off and says they should go take a look at the job board. While they are searching the job board, Dinah spots a job that pays 3,000 coins, and all they need to do is find a bunch of lost cats. Lufas agrees that it seems like a really good deal, but it'd take ages for them to actually find the cats, and she'd rather not spend a week on a side quest, so they keep looking. Just then, they find a nice hunting job. They'll pay them 1,500 coins, and all they need to do is hunt a few orcs. So Lufus thinks it's perfect. Orcs have a 3% chance of dropping their meat upon death, and if you eat their meat, then your max health gets a boost. So she's going to do a little HP farming while they're out there. Later that day, the two arrive at the village where the request was made, and they speak to the village chief, a tired old man who just wants to end things once and for all. He explains that the orcs have been ravaging their village for a long time now, kidnapping their women, killing their men, and destroying everything they've built. He begs the two to get rid of them for the sake of this village, and Dina cheerfully assures him that he doesn't have to worry because Lufus will wipe those orcs out without a doubt, and he is really grateful for their help. With that said, they head out into the forest to track down the orc den, and before long they manage to find it with two orcs posted out front as lookouts. So Lufus starts getting ready to attack. Come to think of it, she hasn't actually checked her stat screen since she got here. So she pulls it up, and fortunately, she still has all her max level abilities, so killing the orcs shouldn't be difficult. But she's not sure if she's mentally prepared for it, since killing these things on screen is completely different from killing them in real life. She activates one of her abilities and creates a dozen swords at her side before launching them straight at the orcs, and the resulting mess is absolutely disgusting, but for some reason, Lufus feels oddly calm about it. Moments later, the orc nest is alerted to the presence of an intruder, so they all rush out and surround Lufus within a few moments. They also have a really big orc as their leader, so any normal adventurer would be in trouble, but when they begin their attack to Lufus, they are all so slow that they look like they are barely moving. The difference is so great that she realizes that she probably won't even need to create any more swords to handle them, so she takes off and starts chopping the heads off the orcs at top speed. She's so fast that the orc leader has no idea what's going on. All he sees is the heads of his men flying off their bodies. She then stops and looks at the big guy just to say, "Hey, I just wiped out your entire squad. What are you gonna do about it?" It goes on a rampage trying to smash her into the ground, but it's way out of its league because Lufus is practically a walking calamity and he is just an obstacle in her way. No joke, all she did to the Orc King was slowly fist bump his head, and a second later, a gaping hole was punched through its head. So she's just way too strong. After Lufus is done with her massacre, Dina begins harvesting some of the orc corpses, and she is delighted to find out that this one still has its tenderloin intact. According to Dina, the vitality of an orc is stored in their tenderloin, and if it is undamaged, eating it transfers that vitality to the user. She offers to prepare some for Lufus once they get back, so she creates a bunch of portals and stores the corpses away. Lufus had no idea that Dina had an ability like this, but having teleportation will definitely come in handy eventually. But for now, it's time for them to rescue all the people who were kidnapped by the orcs. To Dina's surprise, after getting all the women out, she finds out that they all seem to be in perfect health. Lufus doesn't think it's all that strange since in the game's lore, orcs are actually really nice to ladies. They're just really ugly and have incredibly low charisma stats, so they don't even bother trying to riz anyone up and skip straight to kidnapping. Dina is shocked to hear this since she can't imagine such hideous monsters being gentlemen, but regardless of how they treated their captives, it doesn't change the fact that they still kidnapped the women in the first place. So Lufus creates a giant rock fist and smashes the cave to make sure there are no survivors. Dina asks Lufus if she would like her to erase the memories of the girls, since she would want them to have to recall the ugly faces of the orcs that kidnapped them. But Lufus' genuine reaction is, why did you just casually suggest memory wiping like it's a normal thing to do? She asks Dina if it's really possible for her to wipe someone's memories, and she responds saying it's really easy. In fact, if she wanted, she could manipulate and overwrite a person's personality, but aside from how creepy it is that Dina is just able to do that on a whim, Lufus doesn't think it's necessary to alter anyone's memories over an incident like this. They just need to get the girls back to their village safely, so Lufus summons a golem and has it carry everyone on the journey back. Things turned out really well for this mission, but Lufus can't help but wonder why no one else accepted it before they came along. Dina explains that it's because there was no incentive to take the risk, but that makes no sense to her since the orc tenderloin vitality alone would have been more than enough reason to take on the challenge. However, Dina informs Lufus that most people wouldn't take on the risk because, to put it simply, the warriors of this era suck. For instance, Dina says the nation that summoned Lufus is called the Sword Kingdom, and she wants her to guess what level the kingdom's strongest swordsman is. Since it'd be their strongest fighter, Lufus assumes the dude must be just as strong as she is, but to her utter shock, she is told that the kingdom's best swordsman is only level 120. This makes no sense since she knows for a fact that there were tons of people who reached level 1000 alongside her in the game, but Dina reminds her that those were all people from the previous era, and quite frankly, they were the sweatiest of sweats. Realistically, to attain level 1000, one would need to fight constantly, every second of every day and devote their entire life to getting stronger. And the people of this generation simply can't do that. At least not without dying in the process. Lufus now understands why it'd be difficult for the people of this world to hit the level cap, since to her this was just a game, so it was natural to grind as many levels as possible. But to the people of this world, this is their one and only life, so they wouldn't want to waste it. Lufus and Dina eventually make it back to the village, and the villagers are all so happy to be reunited with one another. The women are all incredibly grateful to Lufus for bringing them home, and Lufus is glad to see them all so happy. But if they knew her true identity, they might not be so cheerful right now. The village chief presents Lufus and Dina with the agreed-upon reward, and after checking, Dina confirms that it's all in there, so they are ready to leave. However, before they go, the chief asks Lufus if it is really okay for the village to keep her golem. Lufus says she doesn't really mind leaving it behind, so they should just use it as a guardian to protect the village in case more orcs show up someday. The chief is so touched by Lufus' kindness that he assumes that she must be a messenger of God, but that's nowhere near the truth. Lufus decides it's time to leave, but before she does, the villagers ask her to at least tell them her name so they know what to call their savior. Without thinking, Lufus attempts to reveal her identity, but Dina steps in and gives the villagers a fake identity instead. Lufus is pissed that Dina cut her off like that, but they've been over this already. If anyone were to find out Lufus' true identity, then it'd cause mass panic, and they can't have that. Since they've acquired enough money to cover their travel expenses now, there's nothing stopping them from heading straight for Sval. But Lufus can't be too happy about it, since the only reason they are going there is to stop one of her 12 stars, Ares, from continuing to attack it. She also needs to confirm whether the surviving heroes are truly her former companions or not, so her first stop will be to meet with Megrez. As they approach the city, Lufus begins to notice several pretty lights floating all around them, so she asks Dina what they are, and it is explained that those lights are little specks of mana floating around because the land here is so rich. She says it's proof that they are getting close to the nation of Sval, and in fact, Dina can already see it from here. She seems really excited to be here, but Lufus doesn't see what's so great about it since it just looks like a regular water town to her. They head down to the front gate, and there a guard yells out that anyone seeking entry into Sval needs to have their passport ready. Lufus had no idea they would need a passport to get into the city, so she starts worrying that they might not be able to get in. However, Dina isn't concerned at all because she has the perfect skill for this: document forgery. She simply walks up to the guard and presents 2 passports that she created for herself and Lufus, and after checking them, the guard is convinced that they must be real, so he allows the 2 to enter the city. As they walk through the streets, Dina explains to Lufus that the city of Sval was founded by the wise elf Megrez, and it is well known for the wealth of magical knowledge it possesses. This area is also particularly rich in ambient mana, so several mages and scholars come here in hopes of furthering their knowledge of magecraft. Dina asks what their objective in the city is for today, so Lufus tells her that first, she plans to pay Megrez a visit since there are a lot of things she'd like to talk to him about. Dina freaks out upon hearing this because she thinks Lufus intends to storm Megrez's castle, but she assures her that this is just going to be a peaceful visit. After all, Ares has been causing Megrez a lot of unwarranted trouble, so she still needs to apologize to him for that. But before that, Lufus says she'd like to head to a library since there's still a lot about this world's history that she doesn't know. They start asking around for directions to the nearest library until they end up meeting a man named Grants. You can tell that Lufus and Dina must be new in town because practically everyone knows that all the libraries are located in the eastern section, but he's got some free time on his hands, so he offers to lead the way. Dina thanks him and introduces herself as a traveling merchant with Lufus as her suspicious employee, but Lufus stomps on her foot mid-sentence to get her to shut up because who the hell introduces their companion as suspicious? Grants can definitely tell that Lufus looks suspicious, but he doesn't intend to hold it against her since he's sure she must have her reasons, and Lufus is grateful for his understanding. As Grants guides them through the city, Dina comments on how lively everyone here is, and Grants agrees that the people here certainly are cheerful. But since the city has been under attack from Ares for the past several years, most people don't end up settling down here. Lufus' expression soars a little since she realizes the situation here is kind of her fault, and Grants notices this, but he assumes she must just be uneasy about the threat of being attacked by Ares while here, so he assures her that there's no need to worry because the city's defense system is impenetrable. He explains that the entire lake around the city is actually a golem created by Megrez, and every time Ares has attacked so far, he has been repelled by the city's guardian golem. Lufus scans the lake and discovers that it is indeed a golem, and while level 500 doesn't seem all that impressive to her, the million points of HP it has is definitely an incredible stat, so if Megrez was able to create something like this, then he must be really skilled. Grants then directs Lufus and Dina to the city's monorail and tells them that this will get them to the eastern section in no time. Dina and Lufus will have to continue alone from here, so they thank him for all of his help, and he wishes them luck with their library visit. As Grants is walking away, Lufus takes a quick look at his stat sheet, and he turns out to be level 82. That's technically really low, but by the standards of the fighters of this era, Grants is one of the strongest. Dina asks Lufus to come along so they can get on the monorail, and now that she thinks about it, she doesn't recall ever seeing monorails in the original game. Once they arrive at the library, Lufus heads straight for the history section so she can find out what happened in the 200 years she was sealed away, but as she is searching the shelves, she finds a few books that seem pretty unusual. For instance, these three talk about how the 7 heroes were idiots for sealing Lufus away, and she thinks it's strange that the library is allowed to have books like this when the city is run by Megrez, one of the 7 heroes. Dina reminds Lufus that Megrez didn't establish a dictatorship or anything, so the people are free to say whatever they want about him. And it's not so much that they dislike the 7 heroes, but rather the people don't actually think Lufus was evil in the first place. While people were certainly terrified of her at the time, over the past 200 years that fear has been forgotten, and some people started to realize that Lufus' rule wasn't actually that bad. According to one of the history books, Lufus was a mysterious Blackwing that showed up out of nowhere and united the world under her rule in the blink of an eye 200 years ago. Though she was strict, she was not a tyrant. So many were actually better off under her rule, but humanity ended up rejecting her reign and sealed her away to take back their autonomy. This by itself wouldn't have been an issue, but the only thing keeping the demons at bay that entire time was the threat of Lufus and her 12 stars. So once she was sealed away, the demon army took advantage of the situation and rose to destroy humanity. Naturally, the heroes tried to stop them, but their power fell short and they ended up being defeated. Since then, a lot of the land belonging to humanity has slowly been taken over by the demons, and now they are on the verge of being wiped out altogether. Lufus starts internally freaking out after hearing that because she had no idea the world was on the verge of destruction. That war she started was just meant to be a fun event between players, but no one warned her that her decision would plunge the world into such a dire situation. The library trip has helped Lufus realize what she needs to do, so she tells Dina that they need to go find Ares immediately. However, moments later, the entire city begins to rock as a massive earthquake shakes the foundation. An alarm is immediately raised, and all mercenaries available are called to the borders to prepare for an imminent attack. Lufus looks at the resulting damage and asks Dina if it is normal for a city like this to experience earthquakes of this magnitude. As far as Dina knows, this almost never happens, so Lufus concludes that this must be a result of one of Ares' skills, and he must be on his way right now to launch a full-scale attack. There's no time to waste, so Lufus creates a glider and tells Dina to get on immediately. As they are flying towards the chaos, Lufus puts some thought into the situation, and none of this makes sense to her. She knows Ares was always such a harmless sheep monster, and that it's not in his character to invade a nation like this repeatedly, so she wonders if this is really just because she was sealed away. And on another note, she wonders why she even has memories of Ares in the first place, since she never actually interacted with him in the game, but her main concern right now is to stop him, so she can worry about her memories later. When Ares was a little lamb, he was roaming through the forest on his own when he happened to run into Lufus. She was surprised to see a rainbow sheep out here since it's a legendary monster that's said to only be born once every 500 years, but as she approached it, it recoiled in fear and began crying. Lufus noticed its tears, and if she had to guess, the sheep had likely been on the run since birth, hiding from both monster and humans alike since a single thread of its wool is more valuable than gold. She won't deny that he has a good reason to cry, but she asks him what point there is in shedding all those tears. She tells him that if he is upset about his situation, then he had better be ready to strike back against those who would come after him. Otherwise, he had better prepare to live the rest of his life drenched in sorrow. The sheep took her words to heart and attacked Lufus to show its determination to grow stronger. And she liked its fighting spirit, so she put the sheep down and asked it to come with her. She told him that she wasn't at full strength yet, but she would one day conquer the entire world, and she wanted him to become her first companion. She asked it if it had a name yet, and the sheep shook its head, telling her no, so Lufus looked to the stars before coming up with the name Ares. At least that's how the story went. At present, Gantz and his men are all running out to intercept Ares' forces, because this is clearly the beginning of an all-out assault. Once he arrives on the front lines, he sees a massive army of monsters slowly marching towards the city's gates, and he's starting to worry because there's no way he will be able to hold off this many until the main army is ready for battle. The earthquake earlier must have been Ares' declaration of war, since regardless of his hatred for them, Lufus made a rule saying he isn't allowed to attack without making a declaration first, and ever since, he has followed that rule religiously. Before long, the city's advance force arrives, so the order is given for all the mages and archers to fire before the monsters get too close. After wheeling down the monster, the soldiers begin their charge because they need to keep the monsters at bay until the main force arrives. Gantz is out in front and begins mowing down monsters left and right, but while he may be doing alright, his subordinates aren't as strong as he is, so a lot of them are being slaughtered. At this rate, Gantz doesn't think they'll be able to hold out much longer. However, just as the troops were about to be overrun, countless ice spikes came raining down from the sky, and as the soldiers looked back towards the city, they saw Megrez and Livia, the water golem. They are all relieved that their guardian deity has arrived, and Megrez tells them they can all stand back now because Livia will handle the rest. He then gives Livia the order to attack, and within moments, dozens of monster forces are annihilated in one go. Meanwhile, Lufus has been watching the battle unfold from a distance, and she had planned to step in if the situation became dire, but with Livia and Megrez on the scene, it doesn't look like her help will be needed after all. Speaking of Megrez, Lufus decides to check his stats to see if they are still as good as they were when she and Megrez played together, but to her surprise, he's only level 500 now, and he is afflicted with a debuff called the Curse of the Vanquished. Lufus has never heard of a curse like that before, so she asked Dina if she has any idea what it is, and according to rumors she had heard, after the heroes failed to defeat the Demon Lord, they were all hit with a curse that sealed away half of their power, which is why Megrez is so much weaker than he used to be. And now that Dina thinks about it, if Megrez can't use his full power anymore, then that means he can't create any more golems like Livia, so if she goes down, then the city will truly be doomed. All of a sudden, the ground begins to shake as a giant monster approaches from the mountainside, and it is none other than Ares. After a brief standoff, Ares and Livia clash, and since Ares' element is fire, Megrez thinks Livia should have the upper hand in a direct confrontation. Livia used a water spiral attack, forcing Ares to back off initially, but he comes charging back in with a massive fireball shortly after. At first, it looks like the fireball missed Livia altogether, but Ares was never aiming for her in the first place. His real target was Megrez all along, but fortunately, just before the fireball could hit him, Livia managed to step in and extinguish the blast. Megrez then sends Livia out as a tidal wave to push Ares back, but he uses a flame hop skill to jump over her and begins heading straight for Megrez. Megrez puts up a barrier to defend himself, but since he is only half as strong as he used to be, Ares eventually manages to overwhelm him and crack the shield. However, before he could break through, Livia snuck up behind Ares and put him in a chokehold. The soldiers begin cheering Livia on to put an end to this, and Dina asks Lufus how she thinks this is going to end. As far as this battle goes, Lufus says Livia will win, but that doesn't mean she will win the war. A lot of Livia's HP has been drained from tanking all of Ares' attacks, and it's likely that this was Ares' goal from the very beginning. He knew he wouldn't be able to beat Livia in a one-on-one battle, so he planned to whittle her health down with constant attacks and retreat so he can attack again in the future. Lufus is impressed that Ares was able to think logically enough to figure out that Livia can't pursue him once he retreats, so a constant barrage of periodic invasions would guarantee his eventual victory. However, Lufus can't let his plan go any further than this since it would be dangerous if he actually destroyed Livia, so she will have to deal with him herself. She grabs Dina and jumps down onto the battlefield. And just as Ares is about to launch another powerful blast, Lufus kicks him across the mountain range. Everyone is in utter disbelief when they see the terrifying monster sent flying in an instant, and Megrez is left wondering who on earth could possess such power. But even though Lufus is still concealing her identity, as soon as he hears the way she speaks, he kind of figures it out. Lufus doesn't want to confirm or deny anything yet, so she tells Megrez that she will handle Ares on her own, and afterwards, she will be back to have a discussion with him. However, before she leaves, Megrez tells her that there's someone behind the scenes manipulating Ares' thirst for revenge, so she should be careful. The warning is coming from an old friend, so Lufus says she'll keep it in mind, and then she flies off to confront Ares. Once she arrives in front of him, Ares asks who she is, and this comes as a surprise since when she played the game, Ares only ever made sheep noises, so she had no idea that he could actually speak. That aside, since Ares doesn't seem to recognize her, she activates her intimidation skill, and as soon as Ares feels the terrifying pressure coming off her, he is reminded of his master. However, even though she's standing right in front of him, Ares still refuses to believe it's her because he is sure Lufus died a long time ago. Lufus still isn't sure whether she counts as the original since she was technically reincarnated, but regardless, this is definitely the body of Lufus Mathal. She doesn't want to waste time trying to convince Ares with words, so she tells him that if he truly does not believe that it's her, then he is free to come test her strength for himself. And as an added courtesy, she promises not to hurt him too much. Ares hesitates for a moment because the woman in front of him really does look like Lufus, but he convinces himself that she must be a fake because there's no way his master could have returned. He prepares to attack with his full power, and Lufus is starting to get excited since this is the first time she has gotten to go up against a monster that should be strong enough to survive her attacks, so this will be her first real fight. Ares charges at Lufus with full intensity, however. After pushing her back for a few hundred meters, Lufus easily stops his momentum with one hand and tells him that he has indeed grown stronger than he was 200 years ago. Ares continuously attempts to push her back, but Lufus isn't budging one bit, and she even calls him adorable for trying so hard. As a reward for his effort, she says she will give him a hug, and in the next second, Ares is being lifted off the ground by his head. Lufus then throws him straight into the air, but she's still far from done, so she flies off after him. And once she gets above Ares' body, she says she is going to lightly pet him. Lufus then proceeds to punch Ares with the force of a 10-ton truck, sending him crashing down to the ground. But before he lands, she flies beneath him and decides to pet his chin as well, so Ares is sent back into the air. The people watch the spectacle unfold in stunned silence because they've never seen such an overwhelming display of power before. Lufus finally slams Ares into the ground, leaving him looking like Yamcha, but he still isn't done yet. Ares begins to burn with brilliant blue flames, and Lufus assumes this must be his strongest attack, so she tells him to come at her with everything he has. He charges forward with incredible speed, and with a huge smile on her face, Lufus moves forward to intercept him, resulting in a massive explosion that can be seen for miles. By the time the dust settles, we see that Lufus has once again stopped Ares with the palm of her hand, and she then proceeds to finger flick him into the rocks. She asks Ares if he still doubts that she is the real Lufus, but all of a sudden he jumps out of the rubble and changes into his human form to apologize to Lufus for his foolish behavior. Lufus is shocked at first because she knew Ares had a human form, but she doesn't remember designing him to be a femboy. But now that he thinks about it, he recalls a group chat where he and his friends decided to give Ares a femboy design as a joke, and he chose to go along with it. 20 minutes later, Ares finally stops crying and apologizing, so Lufus takes a look at his stat screen, and his level is still the same as it was back when Lufus played the game, but his abilities have improved by quite a bit. And that must have been the result of all of Ares' hard work over the past 200 years. She tells Ares that she is on a mission to reclaim her 12 heavenly stars, and he is her first stop, so she won't be taking no for an answer. Ares is glad that Lufus came to get him first, and he agrees to join her on her mission once more, but he does have a few questions first. Like, who is that blue-haired woman back there? Dina can't believe that Ares really doesn't remember her, so she runs up to him, stares him in the eyes, and reminds him that she has been by Lufus' side the entire time. All of a sudden, Ares recalls fuzzy memories of Dina standing next to Lufus' throne, but considering the fact that she has memory-altering powers, I'm starting to get a little suspicious. From what Ares remembers, Dina literally never moved from that spot, so he assumed she was a piece of furniture, but he's surprised to find out that she can talk. Hearing Ares call her a piece of furniture makes Dina really upset, so she goes over to one side and starts sulking over it. Lufus chuckles a little because she also has no idea who Dina was at first, but she's been of great help since Lufus got here, so she asks Ares not to make fun of her too much. This was the end of episode 3. Subscribe to not miss the next part.